Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, Sona and I will be breaking down the two most recent episodes of Presumed Innocent. We're just a week away from the finale. Our previous episode, if anyone hasn't listened to that already, or you're just catching up with the show now, preparing for the finale, we have an episode where we covered episodes 1 through 5 in our back catalog. Has been very popular, Sona, so I do think this will even be a more popular episode as the finale is pending. And we'll be going through those. No spoilers for the most recent episodes, Sona. Let's go through them in order in case people are still catching up on the episodes. But I have many legal questions to ask you. I know this is not your purview specifically.
Yes.
But I'm sure you have many legal questions too. But I just don't know if this is how court cases work. And maybe you can provide some insight.
There are definitely certain things that are not the way court cases work. That
and
I
maybe
do
you can enlighten us all.
Yes. Declaring. But I doubt I will have the answer to all your questions, but maybe I can answer some.
Okay, excellent. And we'll be covering those two most recent episodes. Next week, as I mentioned, the finale. Also, we'll probably be covering, to some degree, another Apple TV show. We've been covering a lot of Apple TV because, to be honest, writer strike or not, Apple just keeps putting out shows every couple of weeks. So there's always something to talk about, where some of the other stuff is slim pickings oftentimes. Lady in the Lake, which is a show I'm curious to check out. Have not had a chance to catch up on it. I was on vacation last week and still just didn't have time to watch TV. We'll be catching up with that at some point in the future, at least sampling it. I don't know if we're going to go all the way through with it, but sampling it here and there. And I just saw the finale of The Boys, and I'll be recording my reaction to that later next week. A couple of pieces of news. Sona, I want to get your reaction to both of these. One is just a minor announcement that Severance, they have announced that Severance is coming back. The date of the return. This thing's been in production for almost 2 years, including the delays from the writer's strike. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this thing is going to be good. I've heard some news about a lot of problems internally, but maybe the extra time helped them iron out those details, because this is a hugely popular and very important show for Apple TV to continue as a service. And of course, big for us because the show was so popular. Many of our listeners have, specifically when I asked them, when did you start listening? This is the moment they started listening to us. So it was kind of a watershed for us.
Well, yeah. I truly hope they find the time and resources to do a last season on Severance so that I can be refreshed after all of this time has passed.
It's been quite some time,
yes. And I think especially with the kind of prestige ones, they forego that sometimes. Yep. And I feel like you're giving me an awful lot of credit for having this at the forefront of my mind this entire time that I've been waiting for this show to come back.
Apple TV, just based on my watching these episodes, rewatching these episodes today or skimming through them to take some notes, they seem to give very detailed previously on. I do hope we get a long 4 or 5 minute previously on there. And for anybody out there, we have those episodes in the back catalog, but I'll probably be pairing them up with new content and republishing those conversations as we approach that January 11th, I believe, is the premiere date. So second week of January, we'll have more details as that get closer, but just an announcement for anybody who's, and I know many of our listeners are fans of that show. It is finally coming back. So maybe rewatch some of that when you have a chance here and there. And one more announcement. Sona, I'm very curious to get your reaction to this specific thing. They have renewed Presumed Innocent for season 2. What do you think about this news?
Strange. I don't know if maybe it's going to be one of these deals like we talked about with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where even though this story has come to an end, they leave open so many options for other types of stories. And we all know that the courtroom dramas have endless possibilities, right? So I guess you could have some of these lawyer characters have new cases, depending on how this all turns out for everybody at the end. Some of them could go on to practice law and take new cases. Maybe that's the deal. I don't know. Do you know anything more about what the context is supposed to be?
The announcement, which was this weekend as well, was that this is their most popular series. And I'm not surprised to hear that. Their most popular drama series. I'm sorry, Ted Lasso is obviously much more popular than this. It's a huge phenomenon. This, as far as their dramas goes, most popular, which I assume would include Severance, which was, of course, already very popular. So that speaks to how popular this has been. So, of course, they want to keep it going. But as far as the announcement, they didn't provide any details. They did say it's going to be a separate case. That's all they said. I think that leaves the door open depending on what they like. I can imagine maybe Bill Camp can come back. Maybe Jake Gyllenhaal cannot come back, regardless of how the season wraps up. So maybe they can have some continuity. But I think the key point there is they say this is another case. So I guess that leaves things wide open to which cast members do come back. Is it, let's say that at the end, this is a serial killer. Maybe there's another associated case. Maybe they're going to prosecute that person. I don't believe that's the case, by the way. I'm just making something up. But I think it just leaves the door open for them to extend it in numerous different ways. Or it could just be the concept, right? Someone else who has a similar set of criteria. They're falsely accused, let's say. They also work within the judicial system. They are, caught covering up their own tracks. And then we have to decide, did they do this? Did they not do this? Just basically a framework for another show, which I think makes sense that they could extend it that way. I'm not sure if that would be as successful as this, which of course has much more shared DNA with the original story. But man, when we get to this episode right now, at this point, we are so far off book. Just a very tenuous relationship to the original book.
Yes, agreed.
And and speaking of Emmy nominations, or I should say, speaking of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'm not going to run down all the Emmy nominations, but The Bear, season 2, by the way. I know season 3 has been contentious, but the nominations are from last year's content. So The Bear season 2 has a record number of nominations. Not surprising, but for a comedy. This is not a comedy, everybody. I know it's half an hour long, but that does not make it a comedy. We have to change the way that we categorize these shows. And also a record number of nominations for a drama for Shogun, which I know, Son, I don't believe you watched it, but an impeccably produced series and also phenomenally successful. And another very bizarre renewal, by the way. Shogun season 2 is coming. And of course, Shogun season 1 literally ends where the book ends. So they are completely off book for season 2. But it is loosely based on historical facts. So there's a lot of history they can do.
There is like precedent for this with Big Little Lies is one that was a book.
Absolutely.
And then they did a season. And that Nicole Kidman one, Nine Perfect Strangers, that isn't that getting another season? And that
they announced it, but I don't think that's ever going to happen at this point. Yeah, but they did announce that.
Okay, so maybe this is the new thing: is to start with something that is a proven hit and then just build on it.
And speaking of that, also nominated, I think 18 nominations, nowhere near a record, but just happy to see it in there, was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I thought was a really good show and a little under the radar. So I'm glad that it did get nominated. And that also is coming back for season 2. And I, like you mentioned, as far as 3 makes a trend, right? Same thing. This is like a presumed innocent recipe, very loosely based on the original IP. And then now going completely off book with the next season and just basically saying, hey, we're just going to have a completely different story. And maybe some of the characters come back, maybe not. Who knows? It's wide open for another season. But I very much enjoyed that first season. So hopefully they keep that magic going.
Definitely one of the most fun things I've watched in a long time.
Agreed. Very much agreed. And I do hope more people find it now that it's had all these nominations. Okay. So the first episode of our conversation, but the 6th episode in the series proper, is The Elements. And I already talked about that. And we begin with Dr. How do you pronounce his name? Dr. Kumagai?
I don't know the character's name. I just think of him as the medical examiner.
The medical examiner, exactly, on the stand. And of course, the evidence is very damning. I really like the scene, by the way. The evidence is very damning, but they know how to prod the witness into becoming antagonistic. And as Delaguarda mentions to Molto, that he has like a clean recitation of the evidence. And then, of course, he has to go back and dig in a little bit more. And that's what opens the door to this antagonistic response. And he basically ends up looking like he has some kind of animosity, personal animosity towards Rusty. What did you think about this scene? I just want to call it out now. The actor who's playing Delaguarda, love the fact, just his face. This is an incredible face. Just him slack-jawed reacting to what's happening. It's like a perfect face for this. He barely needs to speak words.
With speaking, I'm not clear on what kind of voice inflection he's been doing this whole time, but for some reason it works. I find it very strange though, but I'm going to let it go because it does work for me in some weird way.
He's on The Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's his diction. So that might be just his
different.
own. It is, agreed. But it works, like you said, for the character. Yeah. He has this constant snarkiness in his tone of voice.
Yes.
I did want to call it out here at the very top of this because it's going to go back and forth so many times. He is such a purely political animal that every scene, he's like, we need to get a mistrial. We need to negotiate a plea bargain. We're winning this case. We're losing this case. Like depending on the previous scene, he has a completely different opinion of the facts on the ground. What did you think about this scene, though? Obviously, not in the criminal case context, but do you think, in your experience, when you are talking to an expert witness, for example, or when that's happening in a case you're working on, basically, I think this is going to be thematic across this entire conversation, having the jury have a negative opinion of the witness, do you think that has a significant impact on the jury or even the judge's decision in the case?
The judge, I'm not so sure, but certainly for juries, you want your witness to be as likable and personable as possible. And there are definitely times when, depending on the content of the testimony, if you're talking about something very esoteric, like some sort of economic analysis, you want somebody very likable who seems like the guy next door that can talk to them in normal English rather than someone like they may be a genius, but comes across as super intellectual and above it all. So these are definitely things that you take into account. I don't practice criminal law, but the more you can make somebody seem like they are not grounded in reality, that they think they're better than you, or you're not smart enough to understand something, or that unlikability is not going to work in your favor, right? Like, you want to bring that out of your opposing witness and keep your witness down to earth and personable and likable.
This particular character, though, is very tough to have that kind of grounded, down to earth. I don't think he ever is going to come off that way.
This is the reason that you do dry runs of testimony, yes, and that you prep a witness. And one of the things that is always very dangerous with a witness, even in a deposition, is you have to know when to stop asking questions. Right, you have to know when you've gotten enough, because very often when you think, I'm just going to ask this one last question, right, that's the one that ends up going wrong and opening the door to a whole line of things that you didn't anticipate. And now you might as well just throw away all the previous good testimony you got because you have inadvertently caused this problem by thinking, oh, let me just ask this one last question that would be so great if he answered it the way I wanted him to answer it. That's the reason you prep your witness and you are not asking any questions of him that you don't already know the answers to.
That's one of those rule of thumb that you never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Yes, I think more so at trial, right? In a deposition, I have heard people say, if it's going to come out, it's better that it comes out at a deposition before you get to trial. So in that way, it's a little bit more open-ended. But I think, generally speaking, you want to have prepped your own witness really well so that you know exactly what he's going to say. And the idea is with the opposing witness, if it's going to come out and it's going to be something bad, let it come out at the deposition. A different role depending on whose witness it is.
Right. So interesting when we get through the forensics, which once again feels like it's telling us something, but if in a court of law, it seems like this investigation is pretty shoddy for the fact they say it right here that the attack seems like it snaps. This is going to pay off later, by the way, that it's a sudden emotional attack. But then the cleanup is extremely cold-blooded, right? It's very sterile, no fingerprints left behind, no DNA, which of course, it's almost in the description of their case that they're building. If the same person did both the cleanup and the attack, then how were they so careless? And then theoretically, even within an hour, let's say, have cooled down so much that they cleaned up to not leave a shred of additional evidence, but didn't cover up their original evidence. That seems to be a huge hole in the case, which once again, this is a TV show, not a legitimate case. But if I was an investigator, that's the first thing I would try to figure out right away. Eugenia gets on the stand and gives testimony. And the twist here in her revelations, of course, she mentions all the negative things that they wanted her to say, but also mentions the fact that Tommy Molto is the person who got reported to HR for harassing Carolyn. So, of course, they're trying to make him potentially this wrong guy. And maybe there is someone in the prosecutor's office trying to cover up their tracks. Maybe it's Tommy. They're trying to indicate here. There's many red herrings in this show at this point, mostly red herrings. And they keep introducing new ones. But this is yet another reinforcement of that potential theory. Sarsgaard is giving a really great performance in this show. I've always liked him on the show, but they had him as just this annoying character. He's become my favorite character on the show. Not that I like him, but that he's relatable. And I like the fact that he just has this antagonism. He's always the guy who gets compared to Rusty. He's always the second best. And here's his chance to shine. But just like Rusty, he's impulsive. He screws up. And honestly, for someone who is basically an impulsive person who makes really bad decisions when they're in the court and out of the court as well, he is still sympathetic to me. And we could talk about this over the course of this, but I have pretty much lost all sympathy for Rusty over the course of these two episodes.
Yeah, I get that.
And Tommy does love his cats, which is always a nice thing too.
Singular cat, right?
Is it just one?
Just one cat.
I thought there were two cats.
Oh, maybe there are two. You would know
one.
better than me. I'm not a cat person. I am a cat person, but I'm allergic. Different, situation. But
you got to get one of those bald cats.
Oh my God, I'm definitely not that kind of a cat person.
Yeah. All right. Another red herring introduced here in this particular episode as well. Rusty's daughter starts talking to Rusty saying, you know what I was hearing about? I read this article about theory of dissociation where some trauma can be mentally taxing or whatever. You forget what you've actually done. So maybe the person in the show, that could be Rusty, could be somebody else, is so traumatized by the act itself that they've forgotten doing it. Do you buy this for a minute? What did you think about this?
It's interesting to me. You're declaring everything a red herring, but we don't really know for sure if it's a red herring.
True. Yeah.
Yes, it may be. 99.9% of them will have to be red herrings.
Right.
They have laid the groundwork for he was drinking, he was irrational, he has time that he can't account for, right? So there's something there, but you put it together with the practical aspects of all the blood everywhere, and there would be evidence of that, right?
And the methodical cleanup, like how did you forget that part of it too? It doesn't make any sense.
This gets into the idea of maybe there's more than one person involved in this whole scenario, which, right.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Maybe it might not be a red herring, maybe, but I don't know. Just the blood alone seems a hard thing to hand wave away. But
right. Next, we see many of these scenes where Rusty is frenetically getting more and more into his workouts. But this is when I start to really lose any kind of sympathy for Rusty. Barbara tells Rusty about her makeout session with the art student, PhD / Dr. Art bartender, whatever the hell he is, the most ridiculous manic pixie bartender of all times. With this elaborate, I thought they were at like an art gallery when he was showing his work. That's his apartment apparently, but regardless, she went back to his apartment, but they only kissed. I got to tell you, at this point, given what this man has put this woman through, she could have said, hey, look, I needed to blow some steam and I went all out. I just did it. And no one saw us. We were in his apartment. It was in private, yada, yada, yada. And I might be like, you shouldn't have done that. You're under a microscope right now. But his violent reaction to this is preposterous.
First of all, what the heck is going on with Barbara's judgment? Why is this the time to tell him? Okay. As far as I'm concerned, she never owed him any honesty.
She doesn't have to tell him. She doesn't even have to tell him.
Right? Exactly. Right. But if she did feel some bizarre compulsion to come clean about this, why now in the middle of a trial? That's everybody.
Let's just add to he's going to be on the stand tomorrow. Let's add to this. It's crazy.
So I question her decision to do this at all, and certainly her decision to do it at this particular point in time. But then, yes, does this man have no self-awareness whatsoever of what he has done and what he is putting his wife and family through to actually think that it is reasonable for him to have this type of reaction. The whole thing strains credulity.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't make any sense that no matter how enraged he might be, maybe misplacing his frustration and anger at this whole situation onto this, that he would take this out on her. He at least would have the self-awareness to know that he can't take this position with her. This is insane to me.
This is obviously a decision the show is making. They don't have to have the scene in here. She doesn't have to tell him, like you mentioned. We don't have to have this romantic interest in the show at all. It adds nothing to the plot. She doesn't have to tell him at this moment. And he doesn't have to react the way he does. So the show is obviously trying to show like how hypocritical his behavior is, which once again makes him feel, to all the things you just said, he's clueless to his actions having impacts on other people. Like, it's sociopathic behavior, which I guess is what we're supposed to feel about him, right?
I guess so.
Which is an interesting decision to make this person who is probably wrongfully accused. More and more so, it seems like he couldn't have committed the crime. And we can talk about that when we get to the next episode. But it does not paint any of his behavior in any positive light at all. Oh, and of course, adding insult to injury with this whole entire thing. The next morning, he puts on his suit, gets dressed, shaving in the mirror, walks downstairs into the kitchen, and he turns to Barbara and goes, "You're coming to the trial today, right, honey?" Yeah, I'm coming to the trial, sure. I don't think you want her there after that previous night's reaction, by the way. But he does get a sweet hug from his daughter. He is nice with his kids. I guess that's the one redeeming factor for this guy. Oh, a quick question for you. So, minor scene here, but I do want to call it out. The judge basically says, look, you're going for murder. You are looking at murder too. Your argument itself about this angry reaction to being dumped, your own facts imply a murder too at worst. So why not make a plea deal? And of course, Rusty doesn't want that plea deal, and Tommy doesn't want to offer it either. So in general, to you, let's say this is your client. Do you take the deal, or is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Given the fact this is just circumstantial evidence, what's the right choice here if you had to make it?
This is one of the many reasons I would not be a criminal lawyer, because I think one of the hardest decisions that you have to constantly be making for your client is whether to accept a plea or whether to continue on. And with the knowledge that many people that are not guilty get convicted anyway.
Yep.
At the same time, if you're not guilty, why should you take a plea? Because you didn't do it. And that balance of what your life is worth and the amount of time you're willing to bargain away from it that's an impossible calculus for me. I would not be able to deal with the stress of that day to day. I think there are many people who say that the risk of getting the full sentence is not worth it, even when they didn't do it. And I think it depends on how much you have to lose. If you didn't do it, you've got a family, you're going to miss your kids growing up, all of that. I think you can put your faith in the jury system, but the jury system has been wrong. It's not unusual. I don't even know the answer to what to do here. I do understand why an innocent person would not take a plea. That's all I can say.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about it. I watch the show and I simultaneously say you should take the deal. But then, like you said, if I was truly innocent and now I'm in that situation, I don't want to take that deal. I'm like, no, I'm not going to give up 20 years of my life, or potentially much less with when it's reduced. But whatever, 7 years, that's rough when you have kids at home. Then the son takes the stand. And this is near the end of the show. I love his performance, by the way.
This is a kid who knows how to stay on message.
I love this. He's just, exactly. He's great. He's just like a politician. He's just sitting there and he's just pounding away. You're the murderer. You're the murderer. Yeah. I love the judge basically saying you can't state things as facts. You can say that's how you feel or that's your impression. And I love where she's like, my impression is that he murdered my mother. My impression is... He was obsessed with her. Like that was like very stereotypical, annoying teen, but a perfect performance for this kid. That's exactly how he would be. And then, of course, end of the episode, we have Ray gets up to cross-examine and has a heart attack, or some episode. It's not a heart attack. It'll be something else. And And this is when I texted you, by the way. This is almost 2 weeks ago now. I texted you right afterwards. And maybe you could add some clarity here. They do go into it a little bit in the next episode. What happens when you lose your lawyer? And you said exactly in your text message to me what happens here. There could be a continuance. You could get a mistrial. So that's it's all open to negotiation at that point.
I personally have not seen it happen, but I could see it going either way of the ship has already sailed, so let's find a way to finish this out. I'll give you a little break. Or I could see, no, you chose to go into this with this counsel that you have, and that counsel is no longer available, and it's not fair to continue. And I think all of the parties' personal perspectives would weigh very heavily in what the judge decides to do.
Yeah, and they delve into all of that in the next episode. So the next episode is called The Witness, which of course is the same witness we just saw. I'm not sure. I was trying to break down these titles, by the way, when we first did the more I look at these titles, the less I think they matter in the context of the show. They're arbitrary.
Do they correspond to chapters in the book? Maybe it's more clear in the book.
Good point. I actually have no idea. That's a very good point. So Rusty's family is watching at home. They hear that there might be mistrial, obviously, because of this. The son mentions, does this mean that with a mistrial, we have to start all over again? He seems to be very concerned about this. I think very importantly, we can get into speculating at the end. Barbara's face, just listening to all of this and watching the screen, the wheels are spinning. It's hard to know exactly what she's thinking, but
yeah, she is doing a lot of acting with her face. This actress.
There's a lot of face acting going on. Yes, very much. Tommy's actually pretty nice at the hospital. They're rehabilitating his character here towards the end of the show, which is part of the reason I think that he's almost certainly not the killer at this point. Turns out, no, it wasn't something arterial. It wasn't like a thrown clot or something. He didn't have a heart attack. It was just something electrical. Don't worry about it. We put a pacemaker in and he's better than ever. He's better than before. They fixed him. He's fixed. Why have this? It's literally just to have a hook at the end of the previous episode because they undo this almost instantly. It's very strange. Not in the book, by the way. This does not happen in the book.
I feel like also there was like a little weird foreshadowing to him collapsing, of him like looking a little bit unhealthy and the head exploding, and they showed him shoveling food. I don't know. I guess I do if you're just trying to create a story, but
remember I told you when we were doing the previous conversation that the show for me started to jump the shark when we saw the head exploding at a scene which seemed so preposterous. And then when he had this heart attack now, I actually forgave the show. I was like, oh my God, his body was telling him that. And I assumed at that moment he probably had a stroke. And that's why that was foreshadowing, like you said, in the story. And they're like, nope,
until
good as new. Okay, now I'm back to really annoyed by the other episode. So Delaguarda flips again. Now he's very concerned with the future of this case because he just saw this guy in front of the jury, tried to rescue his friend. We need to end this. We are cooked. We have to we need a mistrial. We got to get off the hook here. But for the same exact reasons, Maya says, no, we should proceed. And as you mentioned in your text message to me, it could be the secondary lawyer who picks up the baton. So Maya's like, I'm ready to go. She probably knows that there's an opportunity here. And she also knows at this point that Ray's not as disabled as they thought. So she's like, oh, let's move forward. You are a hero temporarily. When close to the end of the case, the jury has a good impression of you. But of course, Rusty's got to mess everything up by going, I'll be my own lawyer. Great idea. What's the other rule of thumb that a lawyer that has himself for a client, has a fool for a client?
Yes, something like that. This is maybe further showcasing his lack of self-awareness.
Absolutely. That's exactly. He just seems to be so full of himself that he can't see that he just thinks he's going to get out of everything, which, by the way, may mean that he's the killer also, right? There's definitely sociology, pathology there. Oh, and of course, the news gets back on the news once again that he's going to be his own defense attorney. And again, we see Barbara's face. Great face acting here. Barbara's like, what now? What now? She literally says that later on when there's like another shoe that drops. And she's like, anything else I should know? There's a lot of news. He comes home from court and she's like, what is this now? That's why she should be there. At least she doesn't have to hear it on the news. And then speaking of Tommy getting rehabilitated here, we have this moment after this whole thing that he's going to be his own lawyer. Ray is somehow able to watch from the hospital, which is, I'm not sure if that is something that happens. Maybe you can speak to that briefly as well.
I'm not sure about criminal trials, but definitely a lot more is available via Zoom than there used to be. So I could definitely see for an attorney that is in a medical condition, them making that feed available for him if it's not available for the general public even.
And you know what? You make a good point. This is a contemporary show now.
Right.
And yeah, during the pandemic, all these things were being done remote. I guess that makes sense. Going back to Tommy, he goes into the bathroom. They've both been caught in the rainstorm. So Tommy and Rusty are there together. And I do think this is an interesting scene because Tommy could be a total jerk, like he's been so many times in his interactions with Rusty. And he seems to be just calm. I'll see you in there. And he doesn't seem to be in a vindictive mood. Or maybe he just knows he's got him dead to rights because, man, speaking of Skarsgård giving such a great performance here, he really does a number on Rusty in the rest of this episode. So things start pretty well for Rusty. He cross-examines the son. I can't remember his name.
Me either.
Interesting pointed question he makes, which is, do you have any idea why your mom didn't want you in her life? Did your dad ever tell you either? This is a pretty ugly question to ask this kid at this point, but it is interesting. Maybe we'll find out more about Carolyn by the end of this show. And by the way, Carolyn is a more well-rounded, even badly as it is here, more well-rounded than she is in the book, where she is purely conniving. She sleeps with everybody in the office. The book totally slut shames her for sleeping with all these different people, which is part of the reason that like there's so many possible suspects for her. And she does it to be a climber. She just thinks that if she can sleep with someone else who can help her out with her career, or she can use that as a manipulation, she'll sleep with anybody.
Interesting. I didn't remember that from the book. I totally believe you. I just hadn't remembered.
Yeah, so this version of her here at least gives her a little more complexity, and we can talk about that scene in the car actually in a minute. But yeah, I would really like to know, how can she deny this child? And maybe the show isn't going to give us that answer, and maybe it's a weakness in the scripting, but maybe we'll see more. Do you have any read on her as a person at all? I think she's such a cipher here. We don't know anything about her.
We know she was willing to hide the DNA. Yeah. We do, which
goes to the ambition, at least. In a way.
Yeah, at a minimum. And I guess that's somewhat to her integrity.
She also was very certain of this person's guilt, right? It seemed that she was emotionally attached to the case. So maybe she did it for what she thought were noble reasons.
Yeah, maybe.
But still, I don't know. I don't know much about it.
I agree. We don't know much.
And I guess Rusty, he does push things a little too far here, especially at the end of his questioning. But for the most part, he keeps things, given the way he's being attacked by the son, he actually does a pretty good job of, if anything, using that to his advantage and saying, here's someone who's explicitly attacking his mom via text and your dad also. So here we go. We have just these alternate theories.
Yes, I thought it was pretty effective.
Okay, so great, because I wanted to ask you a question about this based on your understanding of the law. Once again, not your personal experience necessarily, but obviously having an alternate suspect on paper makes sense for the purposes of reasonable doubt. Of course, that's an alternate theory would help you, of course.
Sure.
But juries aren't really that logical. So it seems like he should have, given his experience, the understanding that as a prosecutor, I'm sure he has made some shoddy cases based on the vibes of a case, and him just throwing out random alternate theories out there. Is that going to work? What did you think about this?
They did put together this trial very quickly, right? They made a point of saying how fast they were scheduling it. To go back to that opening scene about the importance of reasonable doubt, I guess at this point, given the time that he's had, it's just a matter of throwing everything out there to say, knowing all of these circumstances, can you really say it's beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm the person who did this? Which I think is a fair argument. Yeah.
A couple of revelations I had in watching this, by the way. One is I have felt, even the last episode, but more so with this episode, that scene we saw at the very beginning of the show may actually be part of his closing testimony. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw a preview of it for the reasons you just said, that he's going to be like, they have not reached their burden of proof. If you have multiple theories in your head, if you think out of these 5 options, he is 75% and all the other ones are 25%, that's not, like we discussed earlier. I'm like, why would anyone ever do that? You have to be very cocky to be a prosecutor.
Not smart for a prosecutor.
And start that way. But maybe he wasn't a prosecutor, but that's the fake out here. He says that as the defense closing statement, right?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
Second point that I realized as I was watching this, kind of clever. I give the show credit for this. The next episode, by the way, the finale, is called The Verdict. So it seems like the show is going to be much more inside the courtroom than the book was. The book exits the courtroom. Pretty big chunk of it left to go at the end.
Yeah.
When they wrap things up outside of the courthouse. And this seems to be like it's almost going to maybe wrap up right there, or maybe there'll be a little bit extra show after that, but not much. And it does make me think, is the purpose of the show to make us as watchers of the show, we are the jury, right? So to be exactly what Rusty says, which is interesting, by the way, to say when he gets cross-examined in a few minutes later in this episode, where he says, was I obsessed? Did I do things inappropriately in the office? Did I do things inappropriately outside of the office, within my marriage, etc.? Yes, I'm guilty of all these things, but I did not murder her. And basically saying, as a juror, the show is giving us that, right? He is an unlikable person who did all of these bad things. Is that enough to convict him of this crime?
Right.
And I think that maybe I didn't give the show enough credit that this is purposeful, that it is asking us to be the jurors and say, yeah, you're going to see all these terrible things, but do you find him guilty? We have no evidence that he did crime. So do you find him guilty anyway? And that's a big question mark for us. And of course, for the jury itself. Like you mentioned, I think he scored some points there. He didn't necessarily slam the door shut, but he did a pretty good job there of that cross-examination. I think very interesting. I called this out in the notes that he gets into the car with Barbara. This entire scene, they do not speak to each other. But again, Barbara's face, a lot of face acting here. What do you think she was going through her mind at that point?
I think it depends a lot on what the truth is of what happened here, right? If she is somehow involved in this, then maybe she's thinking, oh, this is great. We're all going to get off scot-free.
She seems much more trouble than that, though, right?
Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting here, and I thought they would pay more attention to it. I like that they are very clear about the fact that he was in love with her. He was obsessed with her. This wasn't just a physical thing. It wasn't just a one-off thing. Yeah. And having to be a woman who lives with the knowledge that her husband was in that type of relationship, I think is so fascinating to be in that position so publicly and with such high stakes is something that I wish we were getting more on what was going on aside from the face acting, which I think she's doing an excellent job with. But I feel like I can't remember where in the series of episodes it is, but where she's talking with the attorney's wife and who is her friend and saying, I can't go today. Today's the day that they're covering all the texts, which I didn't understand because then it seemed like some of those texts did come up that she was in the courtroom for in a few minutes, but it's too painful for me. All of that. I want to know, I wish there was more about what's going on in her head and what she's thinking about all of this that she's having to process on so many different levels at once. Did you ever read on what you thought it was?
I mean, it's all the things you just said. The most simple way to read it is, could you imagine you just had to go through this yet again and you're thinking, how much longer could this possibly last? And all those feelings as well and what they put up with. I forgot to mention this in the previous episode, but I'm glad you reminded me of it with the comment you made. She has this conversation with Rusty when the daughter stayed up and he's tucking her in on the sofa and he's talking about when they were little kids and they just watched them sleep. And she describes it as angel mode, which I love that, which I know how that is when they're like demons all day and then you can't, they're so beautiful when they're sleeping. But then he has one redeeming scene in that whole episode, practically, where he turns to her and goes, "Why do you stay? Like, why have you not left me?" So he acknowledges for a moment, at least, his own jerkiness. And she says, "For the same reason you do." It's open as to what that means. Does it mean because she loves him so much, and vice versa, or for the family? I honestly think it's because of the family, right?
That's what I took it to mean as well.
Especially in the context of them tucking the kids in, right?
Although I have to say, and now this is a tangent, these kids are seeming more and more off to me every episode. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially the son. We could talk about that when we get to the very end.
They're going through a lot, but it's just something is off kilter with honestly every child in this show. But anyway, return to the chronology of events.
And then after that scene I mentioned in the car, we see Delaguarda in the car with Tommy. And once again, he's like, "We're cooked. This case is done. We got to get out of this." He flips flops constantly, like a real politician. It seems to be multiple days of rain in Chicago for this period of time over this last episode. And there is this absolutely amazing drone shot of the skyscrapers where it's so disorienting. I didn't even know what I was looking at for a moment. Really beautiful, rainy Chicago shot. And this episode in general, I think, really well made. Very tense at times. I think this is a really sharp episode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rainy once again. Another rainy conversation in the car. Rusty and Eugenia. Once again, Rusty, man. He goes and talks to Eugenia. He wants to know if they question Rigo, what is she going to say? She's like, "I don't know. I haven't talked to her about it. I didn't want to testify in this case, but you're starting to make me feel uncomfortable about what I did testify or even taking your side in this." And then a couple of things. She says that Carolyn had told her that she wanted to keep the baby, and she told you that night, didn't she? And his reaction to this, if this is legitimately true, and I do have a question, I want to get your feedback on that. But regardless of whether it is or not, he is like, "Get out of my car." And he gets so abrupt with her. And once again, dude, do not burn your bridges.
Yes.
Like him with his wife. And once again, speaking of the fact that maybe he does have a problem with women, by the way, that just don't burn your bridges when their testimony still matters to your livelihood. What are you doing here?
That was really strange to me, the ending of that scene, when this is someone who has declared that she's basically on his side, that she doesn't think he did it. Of course, we all have our doubts. And so she's playing out this scenario, right? My recollection is that not that Carolyn did say, "I'm keeping this baby." She's speculating, "Oh, this could be what happened. And you lost it," right? But instead of getting her to chill out, he just amps it up further.
Right.
I don't understand. Right. This man cannot act in his own self-interest for some reason.
Imagine he didn't know at that moment, or did know, either way, and she accuses him of this, and he acted wounded, being like, "I didn't know that. I'm so hurt." Or, "I know she did tell me. That's why this is so upsetting." Instead of being like, "Get the hell out of here."
Yeah.
You don't have many friends left. What are you doing?
Insane.
By the way, I'm just making the connection here that it's the same reaction he has with Maya versus Ray later in the same episode. He has this very antagonistic relationship and very aggressive relationship when he's talking to women. And then in general with the men, he's not that aggressive, although I guess he did go after the medical examiner and he did punch out that guy in his stead. But those were more, there was a back and forth in that regard. He does not know how to manage his relationship with women at all. Maybe his daughter. I say maybe his daughter. There you go. One.
You're bringing up an interesting point, and one that I haven't really considered all that carefully, which is unlike me. I guess I'm just so interested in the mystery of this, but it is a good point.
So then Delaguarda decides to question Rigo himself, and he does a pretty good job. Once again, this actor, he gives great snark. I love when he goes, "Oh, he went with you to question the guy." And he's like, "What a hero." The way he says "what a hero" is incredible, like so dry and sarcastic. And then later on, he goes, "Did he tell you to hide the evidence from anybody?" He goes, "Yes, from you and from Tommy." And he goes, "That's disappointing." So understated. I love it. That's disappointing. Oh, boy. And of course, this is very important because when he tries to redirect and say, "Did I not tell you that I was trying to fight for my life and that I was innocent the whole entire time and claimed to be the whole time. It's funny because Rigo's a little antagonistic when he first starts redirecting, but then she does confirm a lot of things he says. But of course, this was all the lure to get him to give testimony, because then he's going to have to get on the stand, something that everybody told him to not do. And that's coming next. Okay, before we get to that, though, what the hell is up with him taking Ritalin? He's taking Ritalin. His wife's obsessed with him taking Ritalin. The kids talk about it later. I'm like, I am pretty sure the Ritalin is going to tie into the ending, because there's no way they kept talking about Ritalin for 10 minutes on the show without it tying in somehow. And I'm like,
but
what
why
the hell
are
is
they
up with
talking
Ritalin?
about it like it's fentanyl?
Yeah, exactly.
Or at the very least, crystal meth. I don't understand. It was a prescription bottle. It's not even like black market Ritalin. I personally don't understand why I am not automatically entitled to an Adderall prescription just by virtue of being a litigator. To me, it is not surprising at all that a lawyer would be on some type of medication that allows you to hyperfocus, whether justifiably or not. I see a need for it in my everyday work. So I don't get why this seems so scandalous to this family.
Yeah, right.
Especially because I don't know so much about Adderall or Ritalin, but I haven't heard anything about like an Ambien type situation of like, and then I blacked out and I ate everything in the
out from taking Ritalin. Exactly.
And I sent 10 psychotic texts to people. I haven't ever heard of that happening on Ritalin, whereas I have heard of it happening on Ambien. I don't understand what this is leading to. It is very strange.
I now have to do research, by the way, on, or maybe just search Reddit for people who have theories around this, because I am pretty sure they're trying to draw our attention to the Ritalin, obviously. But why? The way I read it is that, of course, it is a stimulant. So maybe it's going to make him even more aggressive. And they know that's already a problem. He doesn't want to look wired on the stand, where he's already been so intense. Maybe he should take something that calms him down. So I'm reading it as minor as that, but I feel like it's bigger than that, considering what a big deal they made about this. The kids are talking about it amongst themselves. I overheard her talking to the therapist about it. What is happening?
Crazy.
What's the big deal with that? Like you said, it's like he's not snorting cocaine every night. What is going on with these people?
I don't know so much about it, but I just don't see a way that this is going to pay off that makes any sense to me.
Agreed. And maybe they just drop it, because there's some other things that seem like they might get dropped as well along the way.
Oh no, Dad's going to be hyper focused. I don't know.
Oh no.
He might stay up super late.
All right. Then Tommy has a flashback to Carolyn rejecting him at the party. This is a little late to have this scene. I'm not sure what we're trying to indicate here.
I think we're trying to indicate that maybe Tommy told Carolyn.
I can understand that being a hook on the episode, like maybe it's him, but we'll get to the end of this episode. It does not seem, I don't know. We need to talk about we'll get to there. We need to get to the end of this episode. And of course, Rigo, the whole having Rigo on the stand was partially a trap to open that door. The judge, who's been very sympathetic to him in the past and has been cutting him a lot of slack, honestly, on the show, she is not having it at this point. She goes, look, I told you. And then she gives him the option. Here's the thing I have a question for you about. She gives him an option to say, look, if you don't want to testify, I'll give you the mistrial right now. Maya, of course, is 100% in favor of this. And Rusty goes, no, question me tomorrow. Tommy has a little smirk on his face. Maya is furious and she quits, which I completely understand. Once again, speaking to Rusty, just what decision-making is this guy doing? I take this mistrial. What do you do?
Maybe it was bad judgment because of the Ritalin.
So Ritalin is doing it, of course.
Is that where we're going?
I guess that's what we're supposed to believe, right? This is like an anti-Ritalin show. That's the real story behind it all.
I was confused because from what I know about ADHD drugs, I think Ritalin is very out of fashion. I'm surprised they didn't make it Adderall, or like I think there's one called Vivance or something like that. I honestly haven't heard about people taking Ritalin in the last 10 years. But anyway, I think it goes back to this ongoing theme that we've been discussing about the decisions you make when you're possibly innocent, right? Thinking like, what could go wrong? If I haven't done it, I haven't done it. And surely everybody will see that I haven't done it. combined with the hubris and ego that a successful male litigator tends to have. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah. Tommy slept at the office, despite denying it. I'm pretty sure he did. It's a big deal for him. We see Delaguarda shows up very concerned with that expression on his face, his standard operating expression of being very concerned.
Hey, wait, before we move off this Ritalin thing,
yeah,
maybe they made a point of the bartender talking about the hand cream with the cannabis in it. Maybe the cannabis and the Ritalin somehow interact to make you black out. I don't know. I'm really spitballing here. But okay, I don't want it to go without noting that was a very strange scene a few episodes ago about the hand cream with the cannabis.
In one of the previously ons, I don't know if it was last week or this one, they brought it up. He just mentions the hand lotion. And I read it as it's just part of his seduction. So they're showing this relationship. But maybe you're right. Maybe the CBD,
I don't know,
mixed with Ritalin is doing something.
Okay, just putting a marker down on that. Okay, so anyway, back to the courtroom.
Once again, strange decisions here. Maya quit in the previous scene, maybe 2-3 scenes before. And then she calls him up and says, let me just give you some advice. Even though I quit the case, that look, just don't be an asshole. And good advice, by the way, because he is being very assholish in this entire show. And then he's like, hold on, I got to go. Someone came in. It's Ray. Ray with his new pacemaker is cleared from the hospital, ready to go back to duty. And then, of course, Maya walks in too. So, okay, why? What is this show doing? Some of these scenes seem, it's bizarre. I don't need a hook in the middle of the show. If that was the end of the episode, I understand. But this shows like putting stay tuned hooks in 5 minutes apart. I'm tuned in. That's okay. I got it. You got me. Anyway, very strange. But this is when he gets on the stand. And at first, he does a pretty good job of deflecting Tommy's question, saying, you've been rash too, Tommy. You have your biases as well. You're not investigating this case properly because you've been fixated on me. You were fixated on Carolyn too. That's affecting your judgment as well. All these things are being reflected there. And then, like you said, they have the full transcript of, it could be obsessive, 31 text messages the night of. Some of these texts, by the way, he had to prepare his wife for these.
Yes.
It goes back to this. And by the way, he wanted to go on the stand even before he basically was forced to go on the stand. You do not want to go on the stand and confront these text messages, right? Like, what? I don't understand. It's as if they didn't see the whole evidence list until now. Like, it's pretty bizarre. And of course, the most damning thing of all this was, and Barbara calls him out on it later, the whole, I'll spend the rest of my life with you. Ouch.
Oh, ouch. This is the thing about courtroom procedure that I do feel comfortable opining on.
Yeah.
There are no unexpected witnesses or exhibits. You are preparing in the days leading up to trial, even on such a short timeline, a schedule of exhibits, a schedule of witnesses, what they're expected to testify to, all of that. Yes, unexpected things do happen for sure. But even then, you still would have to exchange ahead of time the exhibits you expect to use and all of that. There's no way that any of this happens 100% by surprise for the other side in the moment of the trial. That's just not how it works. You may not have much lead time for one reason or another, but you have some lead time.
Yeah, it just seems like he's caught off guard. And once again, he should have warned his wife, which
right.
That's across the board for so many things in this show. Also, he seems to not notice that Brian Ratzer is in the crowd. So when he goes, I'm not a violent person, he's like, oh, hold on a second. I have someone here I want to talk to about that. Or the medical examiner, by the way, who you strangled as well. He's like, I grabbed his tie. True, but still, it's not a good look either way for what's going on there.
Right.
And then, of course, this great use of the soundtrack where the soundtrack is having these beats as he snaps his fingers. And he goes, so when you did that decision, did you snap? Did you snap? And he's snapping his fingers on each one of these. And you feel the tension building. And this is really well done. And of course, Tommy absolutely crushes his questioning of him. And of course, at the end of the case, he gets into the car and Delaguarda says, Tommy, look at me. That was extraordinary. So 5 minutes later, he thinks he's doing an incredible job. We'll see that at the beginning of the next episode, he's going to be on the other side of the fence again. But for now, he thinks everything's turning up roses for them.
Yep.
Barbara, of course, back at home, she's like, the rest of your life. Okay. And she says, dare I ask what now? What could be next in this case? But then, of course, that's not the end of the episode. There is one more scene, which is Tommy getting home to his kitties or cat, and someone's been there. Someone has scaled into the house, or at least escaped through the window, if not come in through the window, and has left behind the weapon, the fire poker, with a sign. I paused it because I thought it was handwritten, but it's not. It's printed, so can't tell anything by handwriting. And it says, "Go F yourself." So that's the end. And Tommy sees this fire poker and takes it all in. Dun, dun, dun. Finale. Okay. So this was a very fun hook at the end. This show has become so trashy, but very entertaining. Unlike a lot of the shows we watched, not this week because I was on vacation, but in general, this show premieres early. It's a Wednesday premiere, but it actually premieres, if anybody has Apple TV, you can actually start watching it the night before, around 9:00 at night on the East Coast. So it's actually available early. I actually try to watch this thing right away because it's, like I said, this is the magic of a David Kelly show. It can be garbage, but he knows how to make TV. This guy does. This show is not the serious version of this that I'd hoped in those first couple episodes, but I understand why it's become so popular because there is some real trashy fun to be had in it. And it deals with serious things as well. So it doesn't completely ignore those things. It just doesn't seem to be the priority, but that's fine. This is fun, right? This is like we covered Hijack last summer on Apple TV. That was a lot of fun too. And a lot of the things in that show did not make sense either, but that was a blast.
Yeah.
We watched all of that. Okay. I want to have some theories here. I'm going to tell you some stuff that's come up on Reddit, etc. I guess people can tune out if they don't want to get spoiled. I have read the book a long time ago, granted, but have refreshed myself on some of the plot details just as a comparison. And next week, by the way, before you tune out, if you're not going to stick around for this part of the conversation, I will do a comparison side by side between the show and the book, which at the beginning was just pretty minor things. Now it's so different. I think it's probably going to be a pretty general discussion of the big differences. And of course, a lot of that depends as well as how it turns out. So I'm not sure if the finale is going to have the same culprit as the book. And I'm not going to reveal the ending of the book here, regardless. But I do want to just talk about who could possibly be the killer at this point. I think there's a pretty finite set of suspects.
I feel like you're dismissing the idea that Tommy did it, but I think they're actually trying to encourage us to think that Tommy did it. Between the scene of her not wanting to hug him, right, and his kind of anger at tearing that thing off the bulletin board, her little victory sheet off the bulletin board, and the idea could be that they haven't found the murder weapon yet because he's been hiding it in his house this whole time. Right. And somebody, while he is at trial, broke in, found it, and left it for him as a ha-ha. Yes. I know it was you, right? That is a possibility here.
I just heard that on another podcast I was checking out that had the exact same theory you just described. And I had not honestly read it that way until then. And so I'm glad you had the similar theory because it does make sense somewhat in what you're describing. But still, if that was the case, the person would take the fire poker and present it as evidence somewhere to give it back to Tommy. He could just cover it up. The way I read it was that someone's going like, here you are, jerk. Here's the murder weapon. You should have been doing a better investigation. And that murder weapon will have some DNA on it or something that provides some additional clarity on the actual case. I think your theory is compelling, by the way, and I wouldn't put it past the show to do that. But then my question becomes for someone to take the fire poker and then present it as evidence and then basically reveal that Tommy's the killer as a big twist in the courtroom. It becomes like a Matlock episode, right? Everything's happening right inside the courtroom itself. And maybe that's the kind of ending we're going to have. But it doesn't make sense that you would leave it there for the killer to keep the weapon.
Possibly blackmail material for season 2.
Yes, if they just continue this story going forward, yeah, that's a possibility.
I will say, I think it was, to my eyes, a sparkling clean fireplace poker. So I think whatever evidence was on it from my quick glance at it, I think I think it's been cleaned off. But still, there's the fact they haven't found the weapon. This could be the weapon. It was in Tommy's house. That still is something. Okay, so I guess you have to talk through who would have the motivation to expose him as the killer, but not only to the point of saying, like, I know that it was you who did it, without taking it any further.
Well, a couple
who would
things
have that motivation.
To keep things very general, without adding any extra textual things to it, I start to think over time that this has to be two people who did the crime. So it's not surprising that one is an act of passion and the other one is a cold-blooded cover-up. So the question becomes, who did the murder and who did the cover-up? And basically what that comes down to is that it is two people in the same household, let's say, one person protecting the other. And that in that case, it would have to be someone within the Savage household, or it could be the son and his father.
Correct. Yeah.
So that is a possibility as well. So those are my two suspects. It seems too obvious to have the son be such a big deal of the story and so much of the testimony we see, and then also be the culprit. It just seems easy. Although we saw the son when Rusty ran into him. I forgot to call this out earlier. I guess this is a perfect time to call it out. That remember, he climbed up into the top of that barn when he was talking to Rusty. So if someone could get in and out of a window, we have seen somebody who knows how to get in and out of an apartment through a fire escape, let's say, for example.
About the son. Yes.
And also could get, but here's to that point, that also could have climbed in and out of his mother's apartment unnoticed as well. Yes. All of that makes sense, except why would he give the murder weapon to Tommy?
Yeah.
By the way, the note itself does seem like something that he would, given his general tone. But why is he handing this to Tommy? Tommy just did a great job the night before. Why would he be calling him out to leave the thing here? This is the last piece of evidence you need or something. That makes sense. But to basically call him a name, what do you mean? The guy's doing great at this moment.
I'm working through this. I guess I didn't properly examine it to the level of what would the motive be for leaving this poker, aside from the drama of dun dun dun.
Right, exactly.
I'm not sure who would have the motivation to do that, because even if you are the real killer with the weapon, you would be fine with either somebody, theoretically, you would be fine with someone being wrongfully convicted for it because it's not you. Right. Or if he walks, that would be fine with you too, unless I guess you were trying to frame him, which then why get this fireplace poker involved? Because it would be anti-framing him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's so questionable, by the way, to your point, it shows up at Tommy's house. So first of all, it gives Tommy the opportunity to be like, I'm winning this case. I don't even want to know what's on the poker. I'm the only one who's seen it. I'm going to tuck it away somewhere, right? And ignore it. It's interesting thematically, by the way, right? It puts him in a similar situation to what Carolyn did before, which was judged as bad. But now, of course, shoe on the other foot, he makes the same decision. So thematically, I actually think that's an interesting direction for it to go into. But that this person who didn't do the murder, presumably did the cover up, right? And cleaned up after the murderer. Let's say it is someone in the same household. Why would they now drop off this incriminating evidence, right? And if it has been completely cleaned of any DNA or anything else, and it doesn't have any additional discovery on it, then what's the point of presenting it? It doesn't do it doesn't prove anything. Like, here's the fire poker. It matches the wound in her head. Okay, we knew that. Okay, thank you very much. It's very confusing as to what's going on here.
Okay, why would somebody tell him go F yourself?
Exactly. My assumption, it could be wrong, by the way, but my assumption was
one of the kids.
Someone is saying
yourself for what you're doing for doing to my dad, because I'm the one that really, I don't know.
Right. That's what it seems like. The person who's the culprit potentially is saying, you go F yourself, you're wrong, and here's the proof of it. So this person is potentially revealing themselves as the killer. And yeah, so let's say just one possible outcome. Let's say Rusty covered up for one of his kids. I don't think this is the case, but let's say that's the case. Then the kid could be like, you know what, you're wrong. Here's the evidence, contrary evidence for you. And then if Tommy decides to go in court and present it, then it reveals that he was wrong and Rusty was innocent. But it seems like Rusty would still be guilty of something in that case. But anyway, yeah, so it just doesn't, there's no clean reading of this for me at all.
Yeah. Right.
So Sona, one of the few Reddit things that have got traction on this show very early in the going that I haven't brought up earlier because I didn't know if it would tie in some way as a spoiler. And I'm not sure if this is just yet another red herring, but I do think it's interesting. And in a way, now that I was just bringing it up in conversation, it almost makes the whole case fall apart. So hear me out on this. Do you remember that they said that they found her this rope, this hemp rope that she was tied up with when they were at the scene, and they found carpet fibers, which were not from her house. And they called the color Scottish malt, which is basically tan.
Okay. Yes.
So this was one of the few things they mentioned early on. This is when Rusty was doing the investigation. They hadn't found a match for the carpet. I only remember that because it was such a weird detail, and which is why I did some investigation as to, maybe we'll see that carpet somewhere in the show, right, as a clue, which apparently we have. So even when they find her body, they say because they found these stray carpet fibers didn't match anything in her house or any place in her office, that she may have been killed somewhere else and then brought there. This is staged as a murder scene. The other option, of course, is that the killer could have shown up and just had the fibers and left them behind. But if you do, and this is why I say the case almost falls apart. Imagine this is like a carpet that she was brought there with. We have now, because of this video surveillance footage, evidence that he was there that night and then left. And then theoretically, what would the scenario be? She then later on left the apartment, tracked him down somewhere where they had this different colored carpet. He killed her there and then dragged her body back. It doesn't make any sense. All that could have happened, but he could have just killed her there. And more importantly, if indeed she was killed, and this is where it's going to come back to the poker, if she was indeed killed with the poker, then why would she have been killed somewhere else and then her body moved back there? The murder weapon supposedly was right there. So let me tell you what the Reddit sleuths have discovered. And I think this is a red herring, but tell me what you think. The carpets. So we've seen many rooms inside of Rusty's house. We've seen different rooms within the prosecutor's office. We've seen different people at home and at different locations. And the only person who's a main player here on the show that has this tan carpet is Tommy. Tommy's the only person that has this tan carpet. So what do you think about that?
The fibers were on her body. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think they were found in the apartment. I don't think they were found on her body.
To me, that's the same as Rusty's fingerprints could be all over that house. There could be reasons that somebody is in another person's home. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're a murderer.
That's true. Someone else could have just shown up, and it might have even been Tommy, right? Who showed up at some point and left the carpet fibers, even if they match, behind. But that could have been the day before or the night of, but not related to the murder. So I see what you're saying.
It could be, or it could be because he's the murderer. I don't know. I certainly think they are trying to build it up so that Tommy is a very viable suspect. So it could be part of that whole thing, whether a red herring or not remains to be seen. But clearly they're trying to establish him as a potential murderer.
The one thing I'm pretty certain about, and this would, I think, negate the whole Tommy situation, is one murderer, one cover-up. And what I think might be the case there, I'm pretty certain, is that the murder was committed. Still not certain who that person was. And another person comes upon the body and suspects that someone, once again, going to that household connection. It may not be that murderer is in the same household as the person who did the cover up. It may be that the person who did the cover up suspected the person.
Yeah. So theoretically,
protecting
Rusty's
someone else.
wife, for whatever reason, goes to Carolyn's house,
Yes.
finds her murdered, assumes that Rusty did it, when in fact it was, I don't know, Rusty's daughter, who is seeming increasingly strange to me.
Yeah, we got to talk about the kids, yes.
And in an effort to help, she thinks Rusty, but in fact, Jaden, I think maybe her name is, she does this meticulous cover up, which I don't know, maybe as an art historian, she is qualified to do. I'm not sure.
Let's say that's the case. Whoever did the cover up had to have familiarity with this case that she worked on, because
yes,
of the way
but
she
we
was
know
tied
that
up.
Rusty kept his files at home at times.
True. So it could be one of the kids. Yeah.
Could be
Or the wife.
anybody who had time on their hands and was a little bit nosy in that home. Or it could be someone in the DA's office.
Yeah. True. Could be Eugenia, who did the cover up. Maybe Eugenia covered up for, when Eugenia, now I'm second guessing everything. When Eugenia is in the car and she says, maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe her decision she's talking about, maybe she covered up the murder thinking it was Rusty.
Because she has this fondness for Rusty.
And then when Rusty tells her to get the hell out, she's like, you know what? I'm going to climb up the side of this building like Spider-Man. We didn't know Eugenia could do that, but maybe she has a very aggressive CrossFit workout we don't know about, and she can do that and leave the cleanup behind.
I know she's fond of Rusty, but I didn't feel her fondness went that deep. But maybe.
I mean, it could be something else, though. Imagine she was jealous of the relationship between the two of them. She kills Carolyn, just smashes her in the head from behind, and then escapes. And then someone shows up.
So now you're at one
Rusty.
murder or one cover up. Oh, okay.
Right. And then Rusty shows up and does the cover up, thinking that it was his wife, maybe. But then they never talk about it in the entirety of the show. They've had some pretty rough conversations. I think if that was the case, he would eventually have that conversation with her. Or in therapy, he'd say, I really think she did it. Let me tell you, I'm going through hell right now in this case because I think she murdered my ex-girlfriend. I guess we'll find out next week. And I guess to the benefit of the show that a lot of times in previous shows, I pretty much figured it out. Even if I'm close to the solution, I have very little confidence on any one of those theories I just put out there. So. But I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So,
and I give them credit for creating enough different options. Possibly one might call it confusion.
Right.
Regarding what the outcome is given in the book. It's a much more direct line in the book, right? Of like, there aren't that many different options of who did it, and all of it is pretty neat. It feels like whatever really happened here is not going to be as neat as in the book, but let's see.
I think a lot of people listening to this and watching this show either do know the story or have spoiled themselves on it. I will not spoil it here, but I recommend people do not spoil it. By the way, don't spoil yourself on this if you don't know about it. You could easily watch the movie after it's only 2 hours commitment, or less than that probably, after you see this. You only have a week to wait. I would enjoy it as much as you can. But what I would say is, for people who do know or have spoiled themselves already, that I think the show definitely has given us clues that read that way throughout. But I also feel like the show has done that on purpose so that they can pull the rug on us at the end. So that's how I feel. But maybe we're going to get exactly what we expect, or maybe it could just end up being Rusty all along.
Hey, maybe Tommy did it and the medical examiner helped him cover it up.
What a weird combination. Maybe Delaguarda did it and Tommy covered it up. And he's protecting him all this time. Now you can just throw any two names in there. It's like it's Mad Libs at this point.
Yes.
I hope it's not. I do hope that it's not something really bizarre at the end where she didn't even know because she had blacked it all out because of her Ritalin abuse. I don't know, but I mean, I hope it's not dumb like that.
one more we haven't thought of combination wise. Maybe the kids have been friends all along.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. So we will wait to see how that all turns out.
We sure will.
We'll be watching Lady in the Lake. I think we'll try to watch at least a couple episodes of that and see if we want to pursue it further. Reviews have been mixed. So maybe it all depends, I think, on how much we like those pilot episodes. And then we can regroup and maybe just give a spoiler-free review next week as to whether we want to go forward with it or not. And then maybe that becomes the show we watch going forward. If not, there's other things to watch. There's many other shows coming. Oh, and the other thing I want to mention to you, Sona, was earlier this week, I put out an episode where I reviewed the new Michael Monroe, Nicolas Cage thriller called Longlegs, which was a big hit last week at the box office. And it's an FBI agent in the 1990s. So it made me think of Silence of the Lambs. So I rewatched Silence of the Lambs, and me and Celia discussed it here on the podcast. And Sona, I don't know the last time we watched Silence of the Lambs, but did you know that movie is almost perfect? It is such an incredibly well-made film. The acting, the screenplay, it's incredible. It's very...
I know you're a huge fan of it.
It's so good. Still holds up after all this time. I really was worried I'm going to go back to it and it's not really going to hold up. It holds up. It's fantastic. So I do recommend you check that out again if you haven't seen it in a while. Don't watch it with Oscar around. People making lady suits is not really appropriate for kids.
No, I saved the episodes of Hannibal for him. That's
good point. You are a Hannibal fan, so that's probably grislier than the movie.
Certain ways, yeah, probably.
Yeah, more colorful though.
Really beautiful to watch in a twisted way.
And Hannibal's available. I think the whole thing now is it moves around from streaming service to streaming service. I think now it's on Prime. I keep saying I'm going to watch that. At some point when I have unlimited time, I will finally watch that show. As much as I love Silence of the Lambs. And Manhunter, by the way, which strangely showed up on, which is based on Red Dragon, the prequel to, not prequel, but the first book in the Hannibal Lecter series from Michael Mann, the director who made Miami Vice and a bunch of other things. That movie was really an interesting revisit too, although it feels very 80s and not as classic but still very good. And strangely, that was available on Prime when I recommended it to you, Sona. And it's hardly ever available to stream. And just as I suspected, it was available to stream. And like 3 weeks later, and I looked for it recently, not available to stream anymore. So I don't know how the rights work, but it's sometimes hard to pin these things down. All right. Anyway, I will talk to you next week and we'll discuss the finale and maybe talk about Lady in the Lake as well.
Sounds good.
Oh, and then we got to talk about the new M. Night Shyamalan movie when that comes out later in August.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.